I'm a bit late to the game with a review of the latest ASUS Zephyrus G14, sure. But let me share my personal take on this thin and light gaming laptop. Maybe you're thinking about getting one during Black Week or simply because the price has dropped significantly since its release. Let's start this review a little differently than usual. I want to show you something specifically interesting for anyone out there looking for a really quiet gaming laptop. Just bear with me for a sec.
This is Hubwood.
Now the ROG Zephyrus G14 does offer 3 performance presets that can easily be switched via this key over here. And they are called Silent, Performance and Turbo, with Turbo only working when the laptop is plugged in. So far so good, but the thing with this 2024 model here is that it's only using a maximum of 90 watt on turbo mode for the GPU if dynamic boost is in effect. In fact, most of the time it's even less than that. And the RTX 4050, 4060 and 4070 that this G14 is available with in different configurations actually work pretty well on lower wattages, like even at 30 to 35 watt, where they are in fact a lot more efficient. And that means that unlike in many other gaming laptops, you can actually play games with around 70 to 75% of its maximum performance when using the silent mode. Now, since this laptop does have a pretty beefy cooling system with a lot of heat pipes and 3 fans in total, it's impressively quiet while running games while in silent mode. And I try to record the difference of these 3 performance modes in combination with a sound level meter at a distance of around 50 centimeters. Now watch and listen. In my opinion, even on performance mode, it is bearable and less loud than many other gaming laptops I've tested over the years. Now, the difference between the performance and the turbo mode are, in my personal opinion, not worth the extra loudness. By the way, depending on your workload, the fans can turn off completely even when it's plugged in using the silent or the performance mode. But when the fans are running, they are slightly changing the speed on lighter tasks, which you can hear, and that could be annoying for some. Now, I usually suggest my viewers using headphones on laptops with loud cooling systems anyhow, but the 6, yes, I said 6 speakers of this G14 are so damn good that you could skip the headset part, even when using the performance mode. Don't just take my word for it, I recorded some gameplay using the performance mode with these speakers set to 60% loudness. Again, watch and listen. And just to make my point, once again on silent mode with the speakers active. In most cases, the fans are practically not hearable. And since the G14 is handling lower wattages that well, you can actually play pretty well on battery. Though, since it's still using a dedicated GPU and a pretty beefy AMD Ryzen 9 8945HS, the 73 Wh battery won't last more than around 55 minutes, even when using that silent mode, since the GPU, CPU and the rest of the laptop still use a combined wattage of around 80 watt for gaming. But if you're mostly playing lighter games on battery, you could actually disable the NVIDIA RTX in here and use the Radeon 780M within the CPU. And I tried this with a TDP cap of 20 watt via the Universal X86 tuning utility, and for Cyberpunk at low settings with a 30 FPS cap, that now resulted in 130 minutes. By the way, watching YouTube at 50% display brightness resulted in 9 hours, and on idle with 20% display brightness and Wi-Fi activated using the silent mode, I measured a decent runtime of 14 hours, which really suits this thin and light laptop in terms of portability. I think a day of work at the university, the train, the park bench or whatever would be easily doable for most people. And since it's only 1.5 kilogram and 16 millimeters thin, it easily fits into any backpack. Now, the CPU and GPU temperatures are nothing to worry about and are in a good range while gaming for a longer time. The all-metal body does get pretty hot above the keyboard over here, but the keys aren't affected by that, and it was comfortable to use all the time. It's also built really well with its all-metal unibody chassis. You can absolutely feel this is a premium laptop. The display is just very sturdy. There's very little flex on the keyboard or the display. And opening it with one hand is super easy, and the hinges, they feel perfectly balanced, though it does wobble quite a bit after rearranging it. But at least there's no wobbling while typing. The port selection is pretty decent for a thin and light laptop. On the left side it has an HDMI 2.1 port, a USB-C 4 port with DisplayPort support, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port, as well as the 3.5mm audio jack. And on the right side we're getting a USB-C 3.2 port with display out, and another USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port, and a pretty fast micro SD card slot. But no LAN port, which might simply be due to its thinness. The flat chiclet keyboard has a decent key travel of 1.7mm and one RGB zone, which can be configured via the Armoury Crate software. There are 4 macro keys, which are pre-configured for loudness, microphone and starting the Armoury Crate app, but could be programmed otherwise as well. But I noticed the keyboard does not have a print key, and screenshots would have to be taken via FN plus F6. The big center touchpad has a glass finish and feels really nice, though it does not have gestures like recent VivoBooks or ZenBooks. The 120Hz 3K OLED screen is absolutely spot on for a gaming laptop with its fast response time. And it even features G-Sync between 48 and 120 Hz, so gameplay just looks perfectly smooth. And the color accuracy is close to perfect as well, making it a great laptop for creatives and content creators also, with one issue though. The RAM is soldered, and only the highest configuration with the RTX 4070 seems to have 32GB of RAM, at least over here in Germany. And while 16GB of RAM is still okay in most games right now, it just might not be enough for larger creative projects in apps like Premiere Pro or Blender and upcoming games. And that is actually my biggest issue with this otherwise amazing laptop. Well, okay, I also think that in this price category it should at least feature a 1TB SSD, but since at least that is easily upgradable, I can look past that. The daily performance is of course fantastic nevertheless. High scores in PCMark 10 and its successor, the Procyon Office Benchmark. Decent scores in Cinebench are 23, as well as Cinebench 2024 and Geekbench 6. The benchmarks for Blender and Adobe programs of course depend on the used GPU, but here are the results for the lowest spec'd version with the RTX 4050 at 90W. Now, but since this is at least a part-time gaming laptop, if not being used for its portability and good features for creatives, let's also have a look at some games, and be aware that I've tested all of them at 1200p instead of the G14's native 1800p resolution, because that way it still looks just fine on a 14-inch screen, and the 4050 is just not strong enough and its VRAM is just too small for that high resolution in recent titles. But in some lighter games, 1800p in combination with DLSS on performance or ultra performance could be an alternative as well. I was testing the single-player mode of Call of Duty 6 Black Ops with balanced settings at 1200p combined with DLSS on quality and frame generation activated. That resulted in FPS of between 80 to 140 and an average of 127 in the first mission and 1% lows of 68 FPS. For a multiplayer match, I used the simple preset combined with DLSS on balanced and frame generation turned off, and here that resulted in 132 FPS on average with relatively low 1% lows of 53 and a few minor stutters while it was playable alright. I also managed to test the new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 with medium settings, DLSS on quality and frame generation activated at 1200p, which resulted in around 74 FPS on average while flying over New York and 69 FPS on average while flying over Venice. The 1% lows have been pretty okay with around 45 to 51 FPS. The texture loading issues you can see here are due to the terrible launch of the game, which caused a lot of streaming errors. I saw an average of around 78 to 105 FPS for Starfield on high settings with the DLSS on quality and frame generation activated once more. Really depends on the region here, but in this city it was very playable as well. And as mentioned in a lot of my videos, lower resolutions in combination with DLSS still look pretty decent on a 14-inch screen, and the 4050 just isn't an 1800p GPU, especially in more recent titles. For Cyberpunk 2077, I was actually trying to use medium ray tracing in combination with DLSS on quality and frame generation activated with medium settings at 1080p, and that resulted in playable 73 FPS on average, but the 1% lows haven't been good due to some stuttering, which might be because of the small 6GB VRAM not being big enough for RT on. I mean, it is kind of possible, but I would prefer to play the game without RT on such an entry-level mobile GPU. PS, the game is perfectly playable on medium to high settings without stuttering once ray tracing is turned off. For Anno 1800, I was loading my big save game with a population of around 1 million at 1200p and high settings. Here the G14 is definitely held back by the game's engine, and the FPS really depend on the camera angle, region on the map, and the overall population and shipping routes. Though it is surely playable even with these relatively low FPS that you can see here. I was testing CS2 with medium settings and FSR turned off at 1200p, which resulted in around 180 FPS on average and 1% loss of 88. So that should be perfectly playable, and you can make good use of the fast 120Hz screen as well. So no issue for the ROG G14 in that case. And last but not least, Helldivers 2 is playable as well with high settings and the resolution scaling set to quality, leading to an average FPS of around 82 with 1% loss of 52, while even heavy firefights didn't seem to bother the system here. The game is pretty demanding on both CPU and GPU, but it's usually running very stable otherwise. Now, as mentioned before, the biggest issue to me and probably everyone else is having with the ROG Zephyrus G14 is obviously the soldered 16GB of RAM for the lower spec models, because it is otherwise an amazing little gaming laptop by all means. And before I forget, I did have some minor issues. A few Windows updates have been a bit problematic and I needed to apply them multiple times, and I was not able to configure or use the new slash LED in the display lid over here and had to reinstall Armoury Crate to do so. Also, I had issues with the advanced Optimus not working sometimes when I use the integrated GPU and try to switch back, but most of the issues just have been resolved with a restart of the PC. PS, you could also use the much lighter but unofficial G-Helper app instead of Armoury Crate. Now, the 2023 model of the G14 is still available in some configurations, and it is still a good option, but be aware that it's not quite as portable, heavier and thicker, has less battery time and comes with a mini LED display instead of OLED. But it can actually be a bit faster, since the 2023 version is also available with an RTX 4080 and even the RTX 4090 mobile, while also having a RAM slot for us to download more RAM. But yeah, if you can get a good deal on this little beast and you're okay with 16GB of RAM when choosing one of the lower spec versions, this is absolutely a recommendation, since it's just a great and really well-built little machine. PS, I want to disclose that the G14 was loaned to me for testing purposes. I will not get to keep it and I will send it back after the review period. No payment was made for this video and ASUS did not require me to create or share any review. All opinions shared here are entirely my own. And that's all for today. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like button and or subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye and tschüss.